Today on CityCast Salt Lake, the Sexuality Information and Education Council just gave Utah's sex ed curriculum an F. It's a flop, down from our previous score of D. So last year we asked, what would gold star sex education look like in our city? And how can we recreate it at home? Parents, if you've got a backseat listener, I'm going to let you decide on this one, but it might kickstart some cool conversations. I'm Ali Vallarta, and here is what Salt Lake's talking about. Ocean Candler, currently you work with schools in Colorado on sex education programming, but you grew up here in Utah and you taught sex ed here until just a few years ago. What was the vibe of the sex ed classes you remember from school?
Well, I feel like I had two different experiences of going to school as a young person in Utah. All of my education was in Utah, including like elementary, middle school, high school, and college was all in Utah. And then there was a very different experience being a facilitator in those classes. So
I want to know, like, you're a kid, you're in the class, it's however many years ago. What's the ambiance?
It was inherently very awkward. I will say when I was in elementary school, I was very privileged because I went to a charter school. And so their approach was slightly more open and collaborative because parents were in the class. It was a parent cooperative school. And so parents and lots of trusted adults were in the building all the time. And they had Planned Parenthood come and present for puberty and for our like middle school sex ed. So it was not necessarily the traditional public school experience that a lot of my peers got.
Yeah, it wasn't the mean girls, like, don't have sex or you'll get pregnant and die.
No, but I will
scene.
say, literally, no, but I will say it was still really awkward and they were not allowed to answer a lot of our questions. I do remember that very clearly.
Yeah. Okay, so the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States makes a scorecard for each state. I went and looked it up. In 2024, Utah got a D- for sex ed content, but Colorado, where you teach now, got an A-. So with that, can you tell me what a gold star sex ed program looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So sex ed programming, the challenging thing is that it can look a lot of different ways and it should look a lot of different ways. So having like a standardized sex ed program is not necessarily the best approach because we know that communities are so unique, even if we're looking at one state or we're looking at one county. And so sex ed programming has to be flexible and informed by the young people that are actually being taught that sex education. That is the most powerful form of sex ed because they can speak to their unique needs, to their experiences as young people, to the barriers that they might be experiencing or that their community has historically experienced. So starting there is the most gold standard. And then from there, ideally, sex ed is inclusive. It is culturally relevant. It speaks to the lived experience of young people and gives space for young people to understand how society has put different impressions and messages on them around how they feel about their bodies and their relationships. And that includes relationships with family, that includes sexual relationships, it includes relationships with friends. So having that open dialogue where young people get to see themselves in the content is more important than the content itself. The other really important piece is that it's scaffolded. We know that skills take a really long time to develop. And so if we can operate from a skills-based lens and intentionally scaffold upon different skills around sexual health and around communication and consent, boundary setting, we will set young people up to be really healthy adults. And that can start in preschool and kindergarten, starting to build those skills of what it means to be a good friend. How do you talk to a trusted adult? Who are your trusted adults? And then moving those skills up and up and up. And then as a young person gets older, there's going to be some more clear conversations around sexual health and boundaries when it comes to sex. But a lot of that skill building can start so much earlier than most programs actually do. do. And then the last really important thing is that parents are seen as partners in this education and that they feel empowered and that they have the tools to continue these conversations at home where they can embed all of their family values and things that they want to share about their lives and their views into the education that young people are getting. And at school, parents can trust that young people are getting the information in a medically accurate and age-appropriate way.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because I feel like something we hear from parents and teachers is like, man, we really ask schools to do everything. We ask schools to like intervene in every possible way, even though they're under-resourced. Mm-hmm. So what would you make of the argument that like, this isn't a school's business anyways? This should be purely a conversation that's happening at home.
I mean, I think to the other end, if schools are not part of this, then we're putting a lot of expectation and pressure onto parents to do this well. And we know, or at least what I've observed as an educator over the last 11 years, is that parents often are under-resourced around these conversations. And so they end up just repeating what they were taught or the ways that they had these conversations with their parents, which was either none, no conversation, or it was shame-filled, right? And also parents are bringing in their own context, their own experiences of sex, their own experiences of sex education, and their own traumas that they've experienced that then inform how they have these conversations. And so the like ideal bread and butter dream is that they are partners in this, that schools are alongside parents and also that community spaces are alongside schools and parents so that young people have opportunities to have these conversations in so many different ways, both at school, at their after school program, in the places where they're hanging out on the weekends and with their families and their parents. And then it's not just one entity or one person's responsibility to have these conversations well.
Yeah, I mean, immediate thing that comes to mind for me is like how our notions of pleasure have evolved in just the past decade, never mind the past like 100 years. I hear you saying that sex education should be evolving as kids age. I know in Utah, it has to be offered at least twice between junior high and high school. But you know, it sounds like you're saying in a dream program, you're getting a little bit of sex ed, a little bit of health class every year. How should a sex ed class, say, for a ninth grader, differ from a 12th grader?
Such a good question. And I will say the distinction between ninth grade and 12th grade is going to be smaller than the distinction between like a 7th grader and a 12th grader. Ninth and 12th grade ideally will probably be learning very similar information. It will just be showcased in a really different way. And again, it also depends on what kind of education they got before ninth grade is going to shift. But at that point, they're really having a lot of conversations around, you know, hopefully they've already learned about different STIs and birth control methods. And now they're really starting to understand how they work, how to have conversations about STIs and birth control, where to access healthcare, some of those conversations so that as they move through high school, they know who to ask, they know where to go, and then they know how to have those conversations when it comes up in their personal life, whether they are having sex or not, right? We know that the majority of high school students actually are not having sex. If we look at the statistics across the nation. And so then with 12th grade, it's going to look a lot more future oriented. Like, what are your goals as you go into adulthood? What relationships do you want to experience right now? Hopefully some of that boundary setting was already kind of established earlier, right? Like they had opportunities to process what their boundaries are and how they can be evolving and change as they experience things in life. But we want 12th graders to feel like adults. We want them to feel prepared to move into the world and still know where their resources are, because so often the resources we share are tethered to them being a student. And so we want to make sure that at 12th grade, whether they're going into the workforce, whether they're going into school, whether they're just life is changing after high school, that they still feel equipped with resources to support them. And that if they don't have the resources, they know who to call. So when we talk about sex ed, I think people think that sex ed is really just birth controls and STIs. But a lot of what I'm saying is like, how do we treat each other well? What are life skills that people need to be in really positive relationships with themselves and really positive relationships with people around them. And so a lot of it is like social emotional learning is much more prevalent than really the sex ed bit of it.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think like when I think about what is or isn't probably being taught in sex ed, and like full disclosure, God, I don't even think I remember. I mean, I didn't grow up in Utah, but I don't even think I remember taking sex ed in high school or middle school. I remember a very awkward 5th grade class that was like, you might get a period, and being like, been there, like too late. But I think a lot about like in terms of what we're talking about as quote unquote adults, but that I don't hear about necessarily related to like the school experience is 1, pleasure, and 2, porn.
Oh, the 2 best P words.
The 2 best P words. Like, how do you see those addressed effectively in a classroom setting?
These are like my 2 favorite topics to talk about because they're the most fearful, right? Like people are the most afraid to talk about porn. They're the most afraid to talk about pleasure. I think something that is so powerful when we think about pleasure is to decenter sex from pleasure. Pleasure is every day. Pleasure is the joys that we experience in the things that feel good, right? And I have seen so many different approaches to conversations around pleasure that are really accessible for young people. I was actually on a conference this morning and they had a conversation around body literacy. How can you build the skills in your body to know when something feels good? Those are conversations that can happen when a young person is like in 1st grade. How do you know when you're happy? How do you know when you're sad? What do you feel in your body when you feel joy or excitement? What do you feel in your body when you feel uncomfortable or you get that uh-oh feeling, right? Like those are really basic, tangible skills that will then build really practical skills when we're talking about pleasure. And then we're moving towards talking about sexual pleasure. So that's what I mean when it gets to be scaffolded. It should be scaffolded because those skills take time. If we give them no space to think about how to detect when things feel certain ways in our bodies and we feel so disconnected from our bodies, which I think is a lot of the ways that education runs and the way that our world runs at this point, we don't have the skills to be connected to our bodies. Then when there are moments where we're talking about sexual pleasure, how do we even know when it feels good? And then as a young person gets older into high school and like 12th grade, 11th grade, where they're starting to really date and have long-term relationships or explore what that might look like in their life, those are times where you can really build intentional, age-appropriate conversations around sexual pleasure. What feels good for you? What doesn't, right? And have those conversations in a really open way. And again, that still doesn't mean half the class is probably not engaging in sex, right? And so there are ways to build on pleasure. As far as porn goes, I grew up in Utah. I know how Utah feels about porn.
Well, and right now, I mean, we have Supreme Court justices who don't even have the language to talk about porn in a way that's accurate and are getting kind of made fun of for it.
Yeah, or really any sexual health topics. Like, let's be real. But yeah, I think there are lots of ways to talk about porn. I mean, I remember I grew up in the age of cyberbullying, and it was like kind of right before smartphones were really a thing that we had in our hands. And so the education and the prevention, and I'm putting that in quotes, was horrible and so unrelated to then like what was actually happening. I remember my sophomore year, Snapchat came out, and like there was no training to prepare me for Snapchat because that's a scary app. But I think that porn is something that, again, those skills have to be scaffolded. Do young people have the opportunity to learn about what it means to be safe online, about what it means when they see things online that don't make them feel good, right? We can think about that in movies, in TV shows, on social media, and it doesn't even have to be sexually explicit, but there are things that are pushed on social media around beauty standards, around race, around gender expectations, around ability, that make people not feel good in their bodies. And so can we build the skills for young people across their lifetime to be able to detect what they're feeling, why they're feeling it, what message that's sending and who's it for. And once we can build those skills and they know who to talk to when they see something that doesn't feel good, then when they're starting to be exposed to porn or sexually explicit media, which we know that age is continuing to get younger and younger and younger, they will have the language and the vocabulary and the understanding of how to talk to trusted adults about it and how to critically engage with what they're seeing. I do not agree, and this is a personal and professional opinion. I do not agree with banning porn and saying that young people just shouldn't watch it and they're not watching it, because the reality is that people use porn as sex ed. So how can we build the tools so that they can be critical about what they're watching and how it makes them feel?
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about a state where our legislature historically won't support bills that require teaching consent. So it seems like the approach from the state is very much like say nothing as opposed to say anything. Ready for a new ride? Let Canyon View Credit Union get you road tripping this summer. Finance your next vehicle with Canyon View Credit Union, and you will enjoy no payments for 90 days, even if you buy something used. Visit canyonviewcu.com to get pre-approved so you know exactly what you can afford, you'll have confidence at the dealership, and you won't have to guess at your payment amounts. Apply today at canyonviewcu.com. Federally insured by NCUA. Terms and conditions apply. On that note, there is this document that's been, that's a resource for teachers who are teaching sex ed in schools and often are tasked with wearing a lot of hats in that realm. And what this document does is it outlines questions that teachers should anticipate from students and how the state would like them to answer those questions based on its own guidelines and regulations, which are pretty strict about what can and can't be discussed. Let's imagine we are in an 8th grade class. I want to ask you, or how about a 9th grade class?
Okay.
I want to share with you a question that I think is really intriguing and one that I probably would have had at that age. And then I'll tell you what the state would like teachers to say. And I'm curious what you think would be an appropriate answer, given that you have a little bit more freedom to speak openly.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's question number 8. How do you put on a condom? The state says, this is a technique or how-to question, and I am not permitted to answer. Please refer to the package instructions. What would you say?
Yeah, that's an answer. That's really interesting. I also do want to note before I get into my example is that this document has a lot of power because we know that teachers, whether, teaching in Colorado, I see this too, or if we're in Utah, that teachers do not get access to enough training and professional development to answer these questions well and in a way that is affirming and in a way that does not reiterate shame. So I just also want to give some grace for teachers that this is a document that they're being expected to use as a teaching tool, and they probably aren't getting really much training at all on how to facilitate these questions well. So I just sending all of my love to teachers and all the work that they do.
Asked to do so much with so little. It's insane.
Yeah. So the question is, how do you put on a condom, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this is a 9th grade class. So if I wasn't in Utah, so in Colorado, for example, we can do condom demos and talk about condom use. So I would affirm the question. I'd say, thank you so much for asking that question. This is a question that a lot of people ask. It can be confusing and there are a lot of steps. And then ideally, we would probably go through an activity where we talk about the different steps to condom use, whether a demo was happening or not. And so we would walk through the steps together. So one of the first steps is communicating with a partner about, what type of protection you want to use in that situation, making sure that consent is involved and a conversation happens before a condom comes out or before anything happens. And then moving through checking the expiration date, making sure that there's an air bubble in the condom, right? There's lots of steps before even putting on a condom that are really important to the efficacy of a condom. And then we would talk through the actual steps of putting it on a penis or putting it on a sex toy and then removing the condom and disposing of it properly. That that question to me reads as information. That's an information question, not a technique question. I'm not shocked that Utah coded it that way as a how-to, but there are certain technique questions that we should be answering in sex ed. We should be answering, how do you put on a condom? We should be answering, how do you use a tampon? Those are questions that are really appropriate and ones that lots of students are asking for. There's also some really great resources online. There's a condom game on Sex Etc., which is a website that is a teen-centered, age-appropriate website. And there's a game on there about the steps to condom use. The one good thing in how they answered that was that they said, read the package. And I do think that that's probably good advice so that they can look at expiration dates. But that's how I would answer it.
Yeah. I asked a local sex educator here in Salt Lake, like, what's one of the biggest things that you wish you could talk about in classrooms that you can't because of state code? And they told me advocating for condom use. We can't advocate for condom use. And so, like, it would just be so nice to be able to advocate for condoms.
Yeah.
On that note, question 26 here, which I also think is interesting. What is the most effective method of birth control? State says, abstinence is the only 100% effective method of birth control. All others fail to some extent.
Ooh, that is such a shameful response.
But it's not wrong, right? I mean, like, on a technicality, right?
It's not wrong, but I think it puts the pressure and a lot of distrust in people, because if we give young people and we give people in general the space to understand how birth control works and what birth control works best for their bodies, we know that efficacy increases. When young people feel empowered in their birth control choices, we know that they're more likely to use birth control correctly. And so, yes, all birth control except for abstinence is at risk of failing. But even in the ways that we talk about condom use as not an effective method of birth control, it's one of the most accessible outside of abstinence. And if you know how to use it, it's actually really effective. So the way that we pose the efficacy of birth control has an impact on how young people feel about their ability to use birth control correctly.
Okay. The last question I want to run by you, I imagine this is a question that gets asked a lot as young people are specifically exploring their sexuality, which is normal. Number 14, how do people who are gay have sex? The state says, this is a technique question, but as with heterosexual couples, intimate behaviors shared by homosexual couples need not be discussed. Is there something to that we need not discuss what makes us feel good? I don't know. It's such an unusual response.
Yeah. I mean, even just the olden days language that they're using is feeling silly to me, but that is very Utah. That is not at all the way that I would recommend answering that question. That question is very age appropriate. It's a question that actually I've supported teachers in answering here in Colorado literally like 3 months ago. And the way that I would answer that question if I were in a classroom in Colorado or outside of Utah or not following that document is that I would say, thank you for asking that question. It's really normal to feel curious about what sex might look like for people. And then I would move into defining what we mean by sex. So in this class, sex means any type of mouth to genital, genital to genital, or genital to anal contact. So really any type of touch that could cause an STI or cause a pregnancy is how I would define sex. And then I would say that sex means different things to different people. And it's important that people are able to communicate with each other about what sex means to them. When people are queer or people are straight or people are questioning, that does not mean that their sex is going to look the same. And it's important that people can talk about what feels good and what feels pleasurable for them, regardless of their sexuality. Is probably how I would answer that question.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's very graceful. I have to imagine, I know that we have a lot of listeners who are parents of kids of all ages. And I have to imagine there are some people listening right now who either like want to email you and hire you to do a private lesson with their kids or are blushing pretty heavily at this conversation because again, what we're talking about here is the fact that so many of us are under-resourced.
Yeah.
For parents who want to provide complementary or counter maybe programming to what's being taught in schools, what resources do you recommend?
So my go-to for parents is Sex Positive Families. It's an amazing website online. They have so many resources. They have a book. And my favorite thing is they have a resource tab so you can get really specific on what resource you're looking for. Two others that I find really helpful is there is a website called Sex Ed To Go. It's learning modules. They have them for students and for parents. So they have a parent Sex Ed To Go that allows parents to get up to date on their own sex ed so that they can support these conversations at home. These are not conversations like math or science or language arts, right? These are deeply tied to us and our experiences. And so it is so normal for parents and caregivers to be overwhelmed, to feel nervous, to feel embarrassed, to feel a flood of emotions because it relates to us and our experiences. And so I think those are really helpful. The last one I'll mention is Amaze.org. Amaze.org is a video series around different topics. Now, most of those videos really resonate to like middle school, early high school age, but they do have an Amaze Junior section that is for parents. And just watching those videos gives some really great tangible ways to have these conversations with young people. And then parents get to decide what of that do they want to utilize and what of that do they not, and how can they embed their own family values into those conversations is really the most important part.
Yeah, I also think one of the powerful things about being able to get a lot of this education through school is just like not having to watch your parents talk about it. Like there's also something as a young person that can be so like, oh no. And there is something powerful about at least having a starter pack to come home with from school. Closing thought here. So I asked a local Salt Lake City sex educator what the most commonly asked questions are in classrooms in Salt Lake City. And they sent me 3. How do I know if I'm in a healthy relationship? What if I don't have a trusted adult I can talk to? And where can I access STI testing? Which brings me to, are the kids going to be all right? Because I feel like those are great. Those are like, it feels like exactly the right questions to be asking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the kids are going to be all right. They always are. I think there's so much power in peer resource sharing and seeing how young people are talking to one another about boundaries, about mental health, about identity, about experiences with racism, homophobia, ableism. Like we see young people having conversations about their feelings with each other so much more than generations before them that they are going to be fine. And those questions just really point to the reality that sex ed is not about the content that they're learning, but about do they have the support that they need when questions and experiences do come up. That is what is important to them. And they do such magical peer-to-peer support in ways that previous generations did in different ways, but probably not as good. I mean, they have phones and internet and ways to connect with each other in a lot more diverse ways than previous.
Ocean Candler, thank you so much for your time and your candor. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you so much.
If you're looking for affordable STI testing, check out UAF Legacy Health. Their HIV testing is totally free. They do chlamydia and gonorrhea for $25. Syphilis testing, $15. Pretty good. Find them at uaflegacyhealth.org, or you can pop over to their office on the corner of 1st South and 10th East. That's all for us today here on CityCast Salt Lake. We will be back tomorrow morning with more from around town. Take care.